Evergreen Media Network Studio, powered by Scott Tree Services.
Welcome to Silver Linings. I'm your host, Janine Barrows, along with Garry Rooney today, and we are very excited and honored to have with us. We are going to have Carolyn Butler Norton, as well as her associate, Sebastian DeMaio. And we are going to have a conversation today that is going to cover elder abuse in the state of Florida and exploitation, which seems to be coming up over and over in our court districts and amongst our families. When elder care attorneys meet with families, a lot of interesting topics occur, and sometimes they lead to multiple different avenues of unexpectations. So with that being said, I want to just kind of hand over the mic to Carolyn and Sebastian and Garry and get us talking about elder abuse and exploitation and what that looks like and how it's addressed in the state of Florida. Thank you guys for being here with us.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having us.
I have the law office of Carolyn Butler Norton, and I have a brilliant associate attorney here, Sebastian DeMaio, who's been helping me with our exploitation cases. So we've decided the format will be that Sebastian will be asking me some questions, and I'll be giving the answers. And of course, Sebastian and Garry Rooney, the other attorney here, can jump in too.
Yay! We're lucky to have you here. Thank you.
So why don't I just start by asking you, Carolyn, what is elder abuse?
So elder abuse is abuse that's a willful or threatened act, and it's generally by a caregiver or somebody in a position of trust. Sometimes it's the dog walker or the landscaper. Very often, though, it's the caregiver, which could either be a family member or somebody hired through an agency. And it's abuse that's likely to cause significant impairment to a vulnerable person, to their physical, mental, or emotional health. It includes both acts and omissions. For example, an omission would be where the person who has control of the vulnerable adult says, I'm not going to feed you anymore until you give me a check for $1,000 or $10,000. We do see that kind of thing happening. So it has to do with the financial exploitation of the vulnerable adult's assets, their property, with intent to permanently deprive them of it. And they often are using deception or misrepresentation to get what they want. They conceal material facts, and they're not using the vulnerable adult's property properly and for their own benefit. They can use intimidation by word. They can isolate the vulnerable adult, which is very prominent in this kind of thing. They don't let them see their family or their friends. Sometimes I get calls from people saying, I'm not allowed to see my mother. My brother isn't letting me see my mother anymore. I've been barred from the assisted living facility. Or a friend will call and say, we used to talk every week, and we went out and played cards and went shopping, and now I'm being blocked. When I get to the house, the caregiver is telling me I'm not allowed to talk to my friend or take her out to do anything.
These are very intentional actions.
Yes, it is.
Like very. How at what point could somebody claim these kind of actions are not, abuse? It sounds very clear that this is manipulation and control.
Yes, it is.
Vulnerable individual.
And sometimes a vulnerable individual is not capable of reporting it, either because they're being isolated or because they don't truly understand what's going on.
And that's a good point you make, Carolyn. When people see a vulnerable adult being exploited, are there any requirements to report that type of thing?
Yes, and certain occupations are required to report that. So if you're a banker, your financial advisor, if your doctor sees something he doesn't like, for example, a lot of times you just stop going to the doctor and the doctor's office will be alarmed by that. Lawyers have a right to report anything that they've observed. Guardians.
When companies or individuals that are consistently working with elders, say you are the pool person and all of a sudden you've been going there for 20 years and cleaning, and then you arrive and There's a bevy of beauties at a 100-year-old gentleman's house. And would that be a suspicious reason, or are we looking for more hard, concrete information, not just, that's interesting. That's different.
Well, there is a requirement to first report any suspicions to Adult Protective Services, which is a branch of the Department of Children and Families under the state of Florida. You are protected if you report, in that it's private. They're not going to give the name of the person that made the report. However, there can be consequences if you really didn't have valid grounds to make the report.
Well, thank goodness you can't just put in malicious reports.
No, people do all the time, especially family members going against each other. But, you can be responsible for damages if you wrongly accuse someone and they actually incur damages because of that.
So, Carolyn, somebody's seen this abuse going on in the community with a friend or loved one, and they've reported it to DCF or the appropriate authorities. What are the next steps that somebody can take with an attorney in order to try to put an end to this type of behavior?
Well, first of all, when it's reported, DCF has to do an investigation. And I've had clients where, they'll go into the house and, a lot of these vulnerable adults, they'll just readily open the door. They let the police come in. They ask to see their financial records, say, okay, here you go. They'll look to see if they see any evidence of exploitation. And if they do, they will then report it to the prosecutor's office. So some of these people do get prosecuted. Sometimes they don't really see anything, and if the person is clothed and they're clean and the house looks okay, they'll report back, oh no, there's nothing wrong. But we have to at least do the report first, and it can come into evidence later.
I was going to say, does that create like a case file that can be utilized at a later point?
That's the first step. So in July of 2018, they passed a new statute in Florida, and it's 825.1035. And this is to protect vulnerable adults. And so that statute allows us to file a verified complaint for protection of a vulnerable adult from exploitation. But the prerequisite to filing that is that we do report it to Adult Protective Services. Then in order to file it, you either have to get the consent of the vulnerable adult, or you have to file an emergency temporary guardianship simultaneously. And unfortunately, a lot of these vulnerable adults will not consent. They don't realize they're being exploited. They'll be like, oh no, she loves me, she wouldn't hurt me. Or they're embarrassed to admit that they've been exploited. So that's a problem.
I've been party to some of those conversations, so I know exactly what you're talking about. They know that maybe it's been wrong, and they understand it after it's been brought to light, but they don't wish to follow through on any potential conflict or prosecution of said individual.
Right, and that can be a real challenge, getting their consent. But another thing we can do as an attorney is there's another route for us to gain that consent. Isn't that right, Carolyn?
Correct. So in our powers of attorney, our durable powers of attorney, we add a clause we've drafted where it says that the agent is permitted to hire an attorney and take all action necessary to file the verified petition for protection of the vulnerable adult.
All right, that's nice to know. So
everybody should have that in their power of attorney.
There's still going to be the option of potential protection.
That way you don't have to go through filing the emergency temporary guardianship.
Yeah, so are there any examples that you've dealt with locally in our community of this type of exploitation that you can maybe shed some light on?
Yes.
Unfortunately.
I had a client, we called him UR for Uncle Roger, and he was a former spy, before the CIA. I forget what they called them, but he was a long-term spy. He was like 100 years old. Very dapper, in the three-piece suit even in the summer here, and he was a publisher, he had published books. And so there's a concept called a trusted person, and everybody should have this in their accounts. So his trusted person on his investment account was his nephew. And so the company called the nephew and said, I have to tell you that your uncle came in and he took out $500,000 in cash, and he purchased two $250,000 cashier's checks payable to these entities that we don't even think exist. And the manager came out and tried to dissuade him, and he was very arrogant and loud, and all the other customers were staring, and they let him go. So he immediately called the nephew, who's the trusted person on the account. So then the nephew got in touch with me because he was like, I got to do something about this. So the man he was a widow and he didn't have any children, so that's why the nephews were involved, and they would be his beneficiaries, his nieces and nephews. So I said, well, we have this newer statute, and we're going to have to file that verified complaint and a emergency temporary guardianship, because naturally this man we called UR, he did not believe he'd been exploited, and he told us that he'd gotten a call. Sometimes he'd say the Secretary of State, sometimes it was the Secretary of Agriculture, saying he was going to get an award of $2 million if he could get back the stimulus checks. Remember from COVID?
Oh, yes.
We all got our little checks, and some of them were sent to people they shouldn't have been sent to. So it was his job to get that money back. And he was going to get an award.
He had a purpose behind his actions.
And he really believed this. And it turned out years later, our FBI, along with security in Costa Rica, found out it was coming out of there.
Wow. Hold that thought, Carolyn, because that leads us into a little deeper conversation about what is exploitation. But before we get there, we need to take a small break for our commercial sponsors, and then we're going to come right back.
At Sunshine Furniture, our 35,000 square foot showroom is filled with the largest selection of in-stock coastal furniture on the Treasure Coast. Dining and bedroom sets, occasional tables, sofas, sleeper sofas, love seats and chairs, all in the latest styles and colors from Tommy Bahama, Lexington, Hooker, Riverside, Universal, Four Seasons, Braxton Color, and Capri. We're the outdoor furniture experts and have hundreds of styles of any patio furniture you need, including a gallery of Berlin Gardens and Pollywood. We specialize in fire pits, outdoor rugs, umbrellas, and replacement cushions. Right now, we're having a spring sale with lots of great markdowns and discounts on everything you need for your Florida home. Sunshine Furniture, 1295 US 1 in the Publix Plaza, Vero Beach. Family owned and operated since 1991. Don't forget to visit our outlet and sales store directly across the street, filled with lots of name brand closeouts and sale items. Visit our website at sunshinefurniturecasual.com.
Sunshine Furniture.
We are back. Thank you to Sunshine Furniture for being one of our commercial sponsors, and even more so for our actual Silver Lining sponsors. I want to say a big shout out to Conway Financial Planning and to the legal team at Rooney & Rooney. Without them, we would not be able to bring these conversations to light and to our listeners. Before we went on break, we were just getting into what exploitation is. Carolyn was just touching on that word, what it means, and I just want to return that conversation back to you and Sebastian and find out what does that mean? Clarify that before we go further into an example.
So the first thing that comes to mind is depriving the person who's being exploited of their money. So they're trying to use their funds for other purposes other than they should have been used. And these people are in a position of trust, or they have, there's a confidential relationship between them and the vulnerable adult, or they have a business relationship with the vulnerable adult. And they're trying to use the vulnerable adult's funds or properties for people other than the vulnerable adult, usually themselves. And the breach also could be unauthorized appropriation, sale, or transfer of the property where they're not receiving reasonable value, like they sell their car for less than it's worth to one of their friends instead of, keeping the car for the vulnerable adult. Not receiving reasonable value is a big problem. Also, fraud in getting appointed as, say, an agent under a durable power of attorney, or abusing the powers under the durable power of attorney, misappropriation of their bank account money.
The power of attorney lets them have access to their financials as well, right?
Yes, but the power of attorney specifically says that any action you take pursuant to its terms have to be done in good faith and according to the intent of the document, what the principal who you're acting for wants you to do. So just because you have access to funds doesn't mean you go out and you buy a sports car for yourself. And the other thing is the failure to provide necessities, like caregivers often are cited under these statutes because they're not feeding the person, they're not giving the medical care. So sadly, in a lot of situations, a caregiver or a family member wants the person to die so that they're going to get the money because they've done something else nefarious to make sure they will get the money.
And when we talk about exploitation, we're talking a lot about money, but you've seen actual cases in the community where it's resulted in real physical harm for the vulnerable adult,
yes.
right?
Yes, but money's always involved too, ultimately.
Course.
Yeah.
Of course.
There was a case about 5 years ago where a gentleman who lived in Marbrissa, he was kind of estranged from his only child, his daughter. She lived out of state. And this caregiver was employed by a local agency, reputable agency, and she was coming in to take care of him at his home. And then she was out to dinner with him at a restaurant. And so the people running the agency saw that there was like an inappropriate relationship going on at dinner. So they, told her, you can't do that. So she told the guy she was helping, and he said, well, just leave them, I'll pay you double. So now there was no oversight. And the sad thing about that was the Indian River Shores police were contacted by his neighbors because they knew something was going on.
Right.
And then the gentleman would scream and carry on and say, I can do whatever I want. And there was nothing they could do about it. Because, again, there's a difference between lack of capacity and undue influence. So a person can appear to have capacity, but they're being unduly influenced. As you age, some people get a thinning of their frontal lobe and they lack judgment and they're easily scammed. And, also he was lonely. And God only knows what the caregiver was doing. She was walking around in a negligee, according to the construction workers who were building an extension on his house so she could move her husband and kids in. And so she got him to change the will. It wasn't hurting the daughter, and she was going to get everything. And she had him change the deed to the house. So she started to starve him. And when they found him deceased in his bed, he weighed 80 pounds. That's pretty extreme.
That is extreme.
But she wanted him to die.
As well.
Yes.
We don't think of a caregiver as being somebody who does that. We expect the opposite. So it is a double-edged sword in the sense that you're taking to the heart because you truly usually trust in these individuals.
Yeah.
Right. That is terrifying.
So she and her husband are in jail, and the children are in the public system, without parents.
Wow. All for the money.
Doesn't help the man. He's, starved to death, which must not have been a pleasant way to go.
And you hear about these stories and obviously that type of thing's terrifying and something everybody would want to avoid as they age. So my next question would be, Carolyn, what can people do moving forward as they, reach the later years in their life to ensure that this type of situation they don't fall victim to?
You need to keep in touch, if you're getting on in age, you need to keep in touch with your family members if you have them, or friends if you don't have close family members, and perhaps give somebody access to your finances. You might even want your accountant to have access to your accounts so that if there's any red flags that come up, they would look into it and talk to you about it and see what's going on. When we did the one with UR, the guy that was the spy, Bank of America testified at the trial, the guy in charge of the fraud unit. And it was interesting because he said there's red flags that we look for. So one of the people that was exploiting UR, actually her account got shut down at the same bank that he banked at. And he said, she allegedly had this business and was getting this money for this business from Mr. UR. And, but, she was paying rent. And there was no insurance for the business. There was no payroll for the business. There were no reports filed for the business. It just didn't seem like a legitimate business. So they locked down that account. So we were able to get a lot of the $250,000 back from her.
Wow.
Which was nice.
Just funneling it from one side to the other.
But, you can name a trusted person on the account, like the situation happened with UR.
Self-identify.
You can have people you trust have access to your account to see what's going on. Of course, that's a double-edged sword, because what if they start stealing
Yeah, what if
from
they
you?
become that person? Yeah.
Yeah, or you can have your accountant have access to accounts or be a trusted person. So when they see large transactions, that's always a red flag.
So it's not, just so I just want to know for my own personal interest. I know that when families come to you, they're coming specific because maybe they have an elder individual that they're concerned with. They want to take steps to be proactive, whether it's to be proactive or preemptive, right? When non-elder care attorneys have families come in with these kind of fears and concerns, what are the general steps that occur? Can you give me some insight? What happens when that comes to your offices, Garry? And what does that look like when you take something like that and you being identified as an issue, not you, but your client is identifying an issue with their family member? How does that cross over for you all? What are your steps to take those safety measures for them?
Well, it's very specific to the case. It's very fact-based. Try to separate the person from whoever may have brought them in to talk with them. And you reach out to experts like Carolyn and you say, I have a situation, and get guidance, and you reach out to others. It's a very small community of lawyers here in Vero Beach, so it's very easy to get second opinions so you don't make a mistake.
Excellent. I like that. So you're always going back to the professionals, going back to the specialized law, to being able to bring in, identify those new statutes and those new cases that can change the way things are addressed when you see it. I apologize. Go ahead, Sebastian, because you were getting ready to lead into what is...
Yeah, I just wanted to say, we've talked a lot about the statute to protect vulnerable adults, and we've thrown around the word vulnerable adults a lot. But Carolyn, could we get you to really explain what makes somebody a vulnerable adult?
Yes, it's in some of the statutes. It's in another statute, 415.102. So if you're 18 years old or older, or you're disabled, they have an impaired ability to perform normal activities of daily living. So that's like being able to shower, get to the toilet, feed yourself, transfer from like a chair to a bed, be able to walk without assistance. When you have 2 or 3 of those issues, then you're considered a vulnerable adult. And they can also have a disability, either mental, emotional, or sensory. And they can have brain damage, just the regular infirmities of aging.
Okay. So some cognitive impairments, would it qualify?
Yeah. So being that vulnerable adult qualifies you to use this new petition we have, which is really unique. And it's a pretty aggressive action. And Carolyn, can you explain a little bit about, what precipitates when you file this type of hearing?
Well, once you do the Adult Protective Services report and then you file the verified petition, the judge immediately shuts down all the accounts that you list that are in the name of the vulnerable adult. And if you know the accounts that the exploiter has where the money may be going, you name them too, without any notice to the respondent, the person who's causing these issues. The judge shuts down all these accounts.
Wow, swift and quick to address it.
So that's a great vehicle.
Oh, yeah.
And then within 15 days, you have to have a full evidentiary hearing in the court to see whether this is going to be permanent. And so the sheriff goes out and they serve the alleged, exploiters. They're called respondents. Sometimes they're not in our county, so our sheriff sends it to the sheriff of that county.
Wow.
We have a full evidentiary hearing, and most of the time I find the exploiters do not appear.
I can't imagine why.
But it's difficult to get past money back if you can't really identify where they are. Like they'll go to serve them and it's a storefront, vacant storefront.
Wow. See, this has been such great information. I know that our listeners need to hear these things so that they can identify when it's an issue in their family and with their loved ones and neighbors. I thank both of you for your time today, your information, your knowledge, and sharing it with all of us. I love being able to educate the people in our community. Please, if you have questions, reach out to Carolyn Butler Norton, Esquire, and her team over there in their law offices, or any of our fabulous attorneys here in Indian River County. If you have a suspicion, please step up. The worst thing that can be done is that it's proven incorrect. And if the best thing is you save somebody. So thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week. Please reach out to the teams available to us in Indian River County and be an advocate always. Have a great day.
You too.
Over by